If you've ever had a doctor tell you that your parathyroid was to blame for your kidney stones, this video is for you. Not only is this completely false, but this bad information has led to millions having their parathyroid glands inappropriately removed, only to find out later that they're still forming kidney stones. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, I'm Joey Weichman, and welcome to Stone Relief. Today's topic is an important one. I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken with over the last decade that have inappropriately had their parathyroid glands removed because their doctor believed to be the root of their kidney stones. However, this could not be further from the truth. So today, we're going to dive into the parathyroid, hyperparathyroidism, and all of the things that relate to this topic to help you better understand the mechanisms at work and why you should not have your parathyroid glands removed if you're suffering from kidney stones. So the first place that we'll start is by just defining what the parathyroid is and what role it may play in kidney stone formation. So the parathyroid gland or glands are four little pea-like glands that are kind of along this perimeter found in your neck, and they are responsible for regulation of calcium. Now, this is not to be confused with the thyroid gland, which deals with metabolism and growth and development and all those kind of things. This is the parathyroid gland that we're talking about today. Now, the parathyroid gland creates something called the parathyroid hormone. We're going to be abbreviating this by PTH throughout this video. And as PTH, or the parathyroid hormone, increases, so does urinary calcium. And if you've been listening or to me or following any of our videos, you know that increased urinary calcium can be a risk factor for kidney stones because, well, it's a building block of calcium oxalate and calcium phosphate stones, two of the most prevalent types of kidney stones. So you have more of this in your urine, it can cause problems if you're not eating appropriately, as most people are not if they have kidney stones. That's why they continue to get kidney stones. But you might be wondering, well, where does this extra calcium come from if, it increases calcium in my urine? Where is it being pulled from? Well, there's a few different sources. First and foremost, bone. The parathyroid hormone signals release of calcium from our bones. And this is not only problematic just as a whole, especially as you get older though, this can become even more problematic with dealing with things like osteoporosis. It also can come from our food. So this is like intestinal absorption. So the parathyroid hormone has the ability to trigger the release of a specific kind of vitamin D, which then creates, or actually absorbs and derives more calcium from the foods that we're eating and then kind of distributes it throughout our body. And some of that does end up in our kidneys, thus increasing urinary calcium. And lastly, it also comes from our kidneys. So when we have an increase in PTH, that also triggers the kidneys to retain calcium. So when we retain calcium, obviously we're retaining more of those building blocks that can then lead to kidney stones. So what happens when we have a perpetual or chronic elevated level of PTH, or parathyroid hormone? Let's dig into that in the next chapter. Okay, so now that we know what the parathyroid gland is, what happens when it decides to go rogue? So hyperparathyroidism is that chronic elevated levels of PTH that can occur in people. It is primarily driven by a chronic deficiency in calcium, which can then be rectified by diet, which we'll get into a little bit later. But on the surface, about 100,000 people a year are diagnosed with this condition. Now, on the whole onset of the entire world or the United States population, this is still relatively small, but it still does play a role and actually comes up more often than not. So it is something to keep an eye on. And the other thing too, it is actually more common in men at a ratio of about 3 to 1. So 3 men to 1 women are going to form this, and we're not really sure as to why that occurs, and it's also generally more prevalent in people who are over the age of 50. However, it can impact people who are younger as well. Now, there are 2 types of this. Now, the primary type of hyperparathyroidism, it starts in the parathyroid. That is the direct result. There is a malfunction potentially happening at the level of the parathyroid gland. There's also a secondary type, and this is more of there's something else happening in the body which is indirectly impacting the parathyroid glands, which then cascade the same type of consequences. And these are things with like kidney failure, so when the kidney is starting to shut down or struggling to be able to process the waste units, that can then impact other parts of the body, in particular the parathyroid. And then there's also a lack of vitamin D as well. So the right kinds of vitamin D that will strip calcium from your foods, just leading to a deficiency in calcium as a whole. Now, again, mentioned that this is caused by a chronic calcium deficiency because that parathyroid, it really acts like kind of like an on and off switch to be able to help regulate calcium in the body to appropriate levels. So when you are deficient of calcium, the body goes, flips that switch up, parathyroid hormone is released in the body, and then it starts to bring in calcium to be able to get the body at the level it should be from these sources that we talked about in the last chapter, like bones, from your food, and also from calcium that is being maintained in your kidney because PTH signals the kidney to maintain it. Now, when you have appropriate levels of calcium or excess levels of calcium, parathyroid hormone is not being released into the body. So you're not going to be stripping it away from other things that are important in the body. You've just got the appropriate levels that you need predominantly through your diet. Now, there's also some things with like vitamin D and vitamin A toxicity that can contribute to this calcium regulation as well. In particular, when it is in higher than actual really required doses, which a lot of people do. They just mega dose on vitamin D and vitamin A, which should not occur. And the other problem with this as well, with this toxicity, is these vitamin A and vitamin D sources are not whole food sources. They are synthetic sources, which further taxes the body, further taxes the kidney, and then just really kind of contributes to the whole situation that you may be experiencing when you have hyperparathyroidism. Now, stick around for the next chapter. We'll talk about what specifically the impact that hyperparathyroidism is having on your risk for kidney stones.
Just a reminder, this information is available in written form on our website. Find the link below in the description.
All right, so now that we know what the parathyroid gland is and what happens when it decides to go rogue, and then we've got elevated levels of that PTH coursing through our body, what is the link to kidney stones? Well, about 30% of individuals who have hyperparathyroidism, or that elevated levels of PTH in their body, suffer from kidney stones. Now, calcium oxalate stones are going to be the most common type of kidney stone that people that are experiencing hyperparathyroidism are going to be able to have. Now, the reason for this is because when you have increased urinary calcium and you're eating foods with oxalates like nuts and beans and bread and just plant-based items. There are no oxalates in meat or other animal-based products. It's just coming from plants. It is a defense chemical that if you're forming kidney stones, it's your body's way of telling you that you shouldn't be eating what you're eating because you're getting a negative result from it. So it is directly linked to that. So when you have an increase in calcium due to increased levels of parathyroid hormone, you then also can combine that with oxalate in your urine that also is coursing throughout the rest of your body because oxalate is cumulative. It collects in our glands, it connects in our joints, it really collects all over the place. And when those two things get together and you have increases in both, you start to get calcium oxalate kidney stones. Now, as I've mentioned previously, I'm going to mention it again. This is not a factor if you are not eating plants. This has been the primary thing that I've done to eliminate my calcium oxalate kidney stones. I just stopped eating plants. And you don't get kidney stones if you don't eat plants, especially if you're forming the calcium oxalate stone type. Now, there's also calcium phosphate stones can be linked to this as well because we're dealing with calcium here because the parathyroid hormone, as you'd recall, regulates calcium in the body. So when it comes to calcium phosphate stones, not only does an increase in the parathyroid hormone increase calcium, which we talked about in the previous chapter, it also increases urinary phosphate as well. So when you put those two things together, this can be really, really problematic. You have calcium oxalate stones on one side, and you also have calcium phosphate stones on the other side. However, calcium phosphate stones require alkaline urine. And just like with calcium oxalate stones, if you have moved away from eating plant-based foods and you're eating predominantly meat and maybe just a little bit of seasonal ripe fruit that is geographically appropriate, this is not an issue. Not only because there's no oxalates, but also when you eat that way, you eat animal-based or you eat a carnivore diet, your urine is pretty damn near as neutral as it can possibly get. It is not alkaline, it is not acidic as some of the medical community and mainstream media might make you believe. It sits pretty neutral because that's the way that we were designed to eat as human beings. So, caveats to all these things. So if you fix your diet, these things are not an issue. And that brings us to our last point here. So, if you're suffering from kidney stones, you are part of the population that is not like the rest of the population that can eat all these plant-based foods and just go on merrily throughout their day. If you eat that way, you get kidney stones. And as you know, if you're watching this video, they suck. They are painful, out of this world painful. So you can fix it though through changes to your diet. And in particular, again, eliminating vegetation, and then also, really important, getting the RDA for calcium. 1,200 milligrams is what they recommend. If you hit that, well, your body should be satisfied in terms of its calcium, and it won't trigger PTH, and it won't trigger all those other negative cascading effects that occur when there is a presence of parathyroid hormone, or PTH, present in the body. If you're looking to say a big you to your kidney stones, join our free community at kidneystones.com.